want to see Ukraine remain a sovereign country, a democratic country, able to protect its sovereign territory. We want to see Russia weakened to the degree that it can't do the kinds of things that it has done in invading Ukraine. So it has already lost a lot of military capability and a lot of its troops, quite frankly. And we want to see them not have the capability to very quickly reproduce that capability. We want to see the international community more united, especially NATO. And we're seeing that. And that's based upon the hard work of, number one, President.
All right. This is U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. He's black, so, he has to be great. And yes, that's a joke. Oftentimes, people have this idea that just because a person is black, that somehow, when you're killing other people or making horrible decisions, that it makes it somehow better. It does not. Goofballs are goofballs, whatever race or sexual persuasion they take on. In a very specific case, Lloyd Austin just said that the objective of the United States is to weaken and degrade Russia. So when people make this point of this is a proxy war, where the U.S. is dumping all sorts of weapons, the U.S. has people on the ground, they have trainers. For the longest time, for years, they've been training mercenaries to go back into Ukraine just in case this particular situation happens where these guys can kind of fight a guerrilla war. NATO has been dumping money and weapons hand over fist to any Ukrainian 16-year-old or old man for that matter that can basically carry it. This is a literal proxy war. I have no idea what proxy war is if it doesn't look like this. Meaning it is a picture image of it. When Joe Biden gets out and articulates on a world stage that Putin needs to leave, and people freak out, and it's like, why are you freaking out? The entire point of NATO, the entire point of the policy after the Soviet Union fell, where NATO continued to expand up into the borders of Russia, the entire point of knocking over Ukraine and the Yanukovych government in 2014, the entire point of all of that stuff was for this situation to take place. It was infinitely foreseeable in the situation. And the reason I say that is, would the U.S. tolerate a hostile force on its border where weapons and mercenaries are being trained and they're being integrated into another military situation? The answer, of course, is no. We've seen this play out with the Cuban Missile Crisis. Let's say for the moment that it was Mexico. Let's say Russia, alliance with Cuba, knocks over the Mexico government, and it starts to bring Mexico into this kind of old Warsaw Pact stuff, where they are putting weapons, trainers, mercenaries, etc., 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 into Mexico. Would the United States accept that situation? And again, the answer is hell no. No government, no sovereign power would. So the fact that they understood that this was a red line, meaning they even said we won't move it an inch to the east, because all of them understood what it meant to move it an inch to the east. That's kind of my point when I start off like this, to get across this is infinitely foreseeable. All of them understood that this eventuality was always going to come to a head at some point. And the moment that the Ukrainian government is knocked over, the moment you have neo-Nazis integrated into the Ukrainian military, and the moment that you try to integrate these guys into NATO, you create a problem. Now, William Burns, in that document, Niet Means Niet, made the point and explained all of this 10 years ago, saying Moscow considers Ukraine a red line, and if there's going to be provocation in Ukraine, it is going to force Russia into a situation of either allowing those neo-Nazi inspired government to take over Ukraine, which is going to be a knife to the throat of Russia, and allow themselves to be encircled in allowing that, or they're going to get involved, which is something they don't want to do. It's amazing to live in this country where this was very clear. And yet, it's the thing that is never explained. Never explained. Even up to the point where Russia was saying, you need to be an independent state. Now keep in mind, this is after the U.S. knocked over the actual democratically elected government of Yanukovych and put in this coup government. There's even after that, even after not fulfilling the Minsk II agreements, even after that, you just need to be non-aligned. And what happened? What did all of the Western nations say? Russia does not have security concerns. NATO is love and light, flowers and rainbows. Our bombs only hit bad people. That's basically what they said, which is, again, utterly entirely farcical, since if the exact same situation was presented to the U.S. would not tolerate it. We were willing to end the world over Cuba and having those missiles in Cuba. Go back and look. What was their reason and justification? We cannot have those weapons pointed at our country and that close to our country where you have a mechanism to attack. You cannot have a fait accompli against us if any conflict pops off. Same difference. Same difference. Lloyd Austin, U.S. Secretary of Defense. Our objective is to degrade Russia. Listen one more time. Again, I don't want to put words in his mouth.
Many countries are going to come forward and provide additional munitions and howitzers. So we're going to push as we can to get them what they need. Remain a sovereign country, a democratic country, able to protect its sovereign territory. We want to see Russia weakened to the degree that it can't do the kinds of things that it has done in invading Ukraine. So it has already lost a lot of military capability and a lot of its troops, quite frankly. And we want to see them not have the capability to very quickly reproduce that capability.
Not only are the numbers that these guys are presenting farcical, they're like, Russia's lost 15,000 men, 20,000 men. Just absurd numbers. If you, again, look at other sources other than Western media, and you get a better and clearer picture. And even when you're looking at Ukrainian weapons losses, material losses, these guys flipping out, and you listen to the reports of Russian artillery basically taking down Ukrainian troops, where Ukraine looks like it's, at this point, losing manpower, where they have very young people and very old people fighting, when in normal situations you would have people who are basically soldiers. Whatever. I'm making the point that we are 1 degree of separation from oblivion. And this is where the Biden administration is taking us. All right, let's go to this story. I know you remember this one. In a break with the past, U.S. is using intel to fight an info war with Russia, even when the intel isn't rock solid. Now, this Kindlanian CIA spook helped write this. This article is astonishing because the article basically says we have been lying for months. And not just lying, the media has carried those lies entirely and completely uncritically. That's what this article is. It doesn't write it in the way of a writer that is pained and debased once he comes to the conclusion, oh my God, my government has been lying to me, and I've carried these lies. Oh, I feel so horrible and shitty at my job because I'm supposed to be critical and give the public a contextual point of view of the world. That's not that. It's not that. It's written in this is slick information warfare. And you ask the question, well, information warfare against who? Who are you information warfaring against? Do you honestly believe that Moscow cares about the lies that you give to your own public? They do not. The only people that you are dousing with disinformation is your own public. You are basically just lying to your public. And the media that's supposed to explain the fact that the government is lying because it's not supposed to be an appendage of the government carries those lies. That's this entire article is talking about. It was an attention-grabbing assertion, making headlines around the world. U.S. officials said they had indications suggesting Russia might be preparing chemical agents in Ukraine. President Biden said it publicly, but 3 U.S. officials told NBC News this week there is no evidence Russia has bought any chemical weapons near Ukraine. The article goes through story after story after story about lies just like that. But it's this part that I want to get to. In one of the string of examples of the Biden administration breaking with the recent precedent of deploying declassified intelligence as part of the information war against Russia, the administration has done so even when the intelligence wasn't rock solid, officials said, to keep Putin off balance. Again, the notion that you will write that with a straight face as opposed to crying as you write that because you feel so debased, because you cared and believed so much ethically and philosophically in your job that it would hurt you to your heart to write that you have been carrying lies, complete and utter lies. My point here is that the Biden administration initiated this. That's my point. I'll read it again. It's one string of examples of the Biden administration's break with recent precedent by deploying declassified intelligence as part of an information war against Russia. The administration has done so even when intelligence wasn't rock solid, which is often the case. Media has also been running with anything Ukraine said, so there's that. Coordinated with the White House National Security Council, the unprecedented intelligence releases have been so frequent and voluminous. Officials said that intelligence agencies had to devote more staff members to work on the declassification process, scrubbing information so it wouldn't betray sources and methods. All right. So the Biden administration has been working with media to release lies. The media has decided to carry those lies and give it to the public. One very specific and limited point of view of the world. Fast forward to stories like this. U.S. intelligence is helping Ukraine kill Russian generals, officials say. The United States provided intelligence about Russian units that has allowed Ukrainians to target and kill many Russian generals who have died in action in the Ukraine war. Ukraine officials said they have killed approximately 12 generals on the front line, a number that has astonished military analysts. It's astonished military analysts because the shit is not true. Russia's lost 2 generals that we know of. You couldn't even hide that number of generals being killed, considering they are actual generals and they will be making appearances, etc., etc. It's farcical. Nevertheless, Ukraine said it, so of course they're going to run it. Right here, though. The targeting is helping part of a classified effort by the Biden administration to provide real-time battlefield intelligence to Ukraine. The intelligence also includes anticipated Russian troop movements. Now, think about what we're saying here. Austin just said our job and objective is to basically degrade Russia. The economic war was launched with the notion of destroying the Russian economy, so much so that people would rise up and take Putin out of office. Putin's approval rating, by the way, has shot up, not down, and was at 70%, and I believe even made it hit 80%. Biden's approval rating is in the toilet. Boris Johnson just lost a bunch of local elections and will probably lose that much more. Germany and those elections, they may lose those elections. Again, issues of inflation, the same stuff that is basically taking place here. So whereas an economic war was launched with the notion of destroying Russia, Russia has actually gained revenue as a result of the sanctions and the war that was launched against it. The ruble went up. The money and revenue that they were getting went up. They basically made a profit as these other countries degrade into all sorts of chaos because of the amount that they are now paying for energy. It is utterly and entirely absurd. It has gotten cartoonish on some level in the way this stuff is basically backfiring and hitting these governments. In this case, though, they're saying 1 degree of separation, we're killing Russians. U.S. intelligence is giving it to them. Now think about what that means. Think about what that means. The United States, 2 nuclear-powered nations, Russia is very and entirely clear that the U.S. has been getting intelligence. They didn't need the reports to show them that. I mean, there are reports that U.S. service members are literally on the ground in Ukraine. And everybody is keeping it hush-hush because nobody wants to deal with the implications and the ramifications of what that means. This is stuff that's reported in the French press. And now they're reporting that you've been giving them info to kill our generals. How does this not make the U.S. a belligerent in this conflict? Explain that to me. Explain that. Here's another story. U.S. intelligence helped Ukraine strike Russian flagship, the Moskva. So now they're saying, hey, we gave them intel to do that too. That's what we did with the United States. Kirby comes out and says, the U.S. is not providing intelligence on the location of senior Russian generals on the battlefield in Ukraine. And he also said they're giving them to help them fight Russia. So they get spooked. And Kirby comes out and says, neither of those stories are true. There was another story that basically said that U.S. intelligence helped shoot down Russian transport, which was carrying hundreds of Russian troops. Are you comfortable with that? As an American, Are you comfortable with that? What does that mean? How does this not provoke Moscow into taking larger methods and actions? How many of those people are in war zones or in conflict zones? How many people are vulnerable? And in the context of those troops that are vulnerable, is it possible for retaliation to take place? Of course it's possible for retaliation. You have literally come out and said that you have been providing intelligence to kill Russian generals in a war, civil war in many respects, on the Russian border. One of two things is true. They are trying to provoke a larger conflict where Biden and his administration fully and completely understands that Ukraine is losing, regardless of the propaganda they give to the Western press media. That's relevant to the point that the reality is all of them understand that Ukraine has no chance to win that war. All of them understand at this point they're just trying to take a pound of flesh out of Russia, and they're going to use the death of Ukrainians, senseless deaths of Ukrainians, to basically do it. All of them get that. But what happens when you put all of your political capital, you failed miserably at everything that you did at home. You failed miserably in your foreign policy escapades in Afghanistan. And now in this, you've put all of this political capital behind Ukraine, going up to trying to give $30 billion to this country. For what? For what? For a losing war. But you can't call it a losing war, which is the rub. Because the people are not necessarily want to give all of that money to Ukraine. They probably don't want to give it to them now. But definitely not in a situation of a hopeless and losing cause. On top of that, you can't even give a contextual view of how all of this started, because once again, the public will be apoplectic when they understand U.S. and Western culpability in provoking this very conflict. So you have to hide and obfuscate from a huge amount of stuff and a huge amount of information that's taking place. That is secondary, though, from what the Biden administration knows themselves. They know they're losing this war. Is the Biden administration trying to provoke Russia into a larger scale conflict in order to hide the fact that they are going to lose this war? At some point, the propaganda breaks down to reality, just like it did with Mariupol. Oh, Ukrainians are stopping the Russians. Russians are failing. Mariupol fell. How do you explain that? Can't explain that, because up to that point, you've just been lying to the public. And so at some point, that propaganda collapses on itself. It has to. And when it does the Biden administration that has wrapped all of this political capital in that one specific thing, can they pull back? How do they save face in that situation? And when political leaders get wrapped in stuff and trapped in a certain political action, saving face is radically important, because oftentimes they will take provocative action even further if there is no way for them to save face politically. This is the thing that I am terrified of. Biden is incompetent and has schizophrenic policy, and none of this policy has worked out in the way that he thought and intended. And the stupid vassal states of Europe, those gang of idiots, went right along with them once again, to their detriment once again. So instead of accepting some level of negotiation on a conflict of Ukraine being a neutral country, they didn't want to do that. They instead pushed to this senseless, utter and entire catastrophe, this immoral catastrophe that in no circumstance needed to take place. Now they're freaked out because they get what it means. They understand being 1 degree of separation away from another nuclear power is too close for comfort. And telling Russia, basically openly saying, we have been given information to kill Russians. That's what we've been doing. We're the United States. We've been helping Ukraine kill Russians. Now, here's the catch. Biden may be spooked out by this or freaked out by this, and U.S. intel officials are like, stop doing that. Stop doing that. You're going to expand the length and width of this conflict. And like I said, it's not just to expand the width of this conflict. It's also there are U.S. service members in other theaters of conflict and war that are radically vulnerable, especially if it starts getting assistance from other players in order to get back at the fact that you were given intelligence to kill, or from the Russian standpoint, murder Russians. It's stupid on its face. And usually that stuff is kept behind the scenes. This is not behind the scenes. So Biden, freaked out by the implications, comes out with this. Biden told media reports about U.S. intel sharing Ukraine are counterproductive. Hey, that's not helping us, guys. That's not helping us. But understand, it was the Biden administration that opened up the propaganda campaign himself. Meaning his own administration did that. And now, in this kind of weird schizophrenic way, they get spooked. And this happens. President Biden spoke with top intelligence and defense officials on Friday to stress the importance of their work, but also that recent reports about U.S. intelligence sharing with Ukraine have been counterproductive, according to two officials. On the phone, the CIA Director William Burns, Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines, and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. Biden's message was such that disclosures distract from our objective, one official said. The other said Biden conveyed that leaks should stop. Leaks should stop. Let's go back to the other report. Right here. The administration has done so even when intelligence wasn't rock solid, officials said, to keep Putin off balance. Coordinated with the White House National Security Council, the unprecedented releases have been so frequent and voluminous, officials said, that intelligence agencies had to devote staff members to drop basically bad data and information, calling it intelligence. And right here. And a string of recent examples, the Biden administration is breaking with recent precedent of deploying declassified intelligence as part of an information war against Russia. Sounds like this is something that the Biden administration did intentionally. And my thing is, certainly you know this is a provocation. You are belligerent in this conflict at this point. And so Biden coming out basically saying, hey, stop that, stop that, stop that. That's not helping, that's not helping. The New York Times also reports that the Biden administration was apparently worried that releases like this will escalate and may widen the conflict. And so then you have to ask the question, okay, well, why are you doing this? Is it possible that Biden is trying to provoke Russia because he understands that if this goes the way it goes, that the propaganda falls away, Ukraine basically collapses, and this conflict is lost? Does he know that? And is he concerned with the consequences of that for him politically at home to lose fantastically and in the public world stage once again? In which case, this stuff is coming out in order to provoke it. All right, if that's the case, then why the schizophrenic response of saying, stop doing that, stop doing that, stop doing that, stop those leaks, stop those leaks? That looks bad, that looks impolite, saying that we're helping kill Russians. But again, I showed you the video of Lloyd Austin basically saying the objective of this was to degrade the Russian military. How do you do that? You kill Russians. You help Ukrainians kill Russians. On top of that, you're giving $30 billion to kill Russians. You're sending equipment and howitzers and all of this technology. For what? To kill Russians. Whether it's intelligence, whether it's the weapons that you're sending, whether it's the mercenaries that you're training, whether it's the money that you're basically sending over to Zelensky, whatever you're doing, do you believe that they are unaware that you are doing that to kill Russians? So why all of a sudden it's impolite? Why is it impolite all of a sudden? Do you think people are unaware that what your objective is in this? Do you think people are blissfully unaware that this is a proxy war by definition? I don't know what's going on in the heads of these guys in Washington. This looks schizophrenic at best. They're basically starting a policy, then repudiating the policy that they basically started. And it seems that they're now freaked out about what this looks like and what this means, which begs the question, why didn't you think about that before you went along with this particular policy? I mean, keep in mind, this is not tiddlywinks. This is not two people playing chess in a barbershop with $1 being up for grabs. This is a war where a large number of people are getting killed. They're getting killed for provocation that was basically done by US and NATO as they decided to continue this kind of world as a global chessboard after the Soviet Union fell. And we cannot allow another power center to take place in its remnants, which right off the bat puts you at odds with countries that want to have a certain degree of sovereignty. I don't know what's going on in their heads. It seems like some level of gravity and reality as sinking in about what this means and how ingratiated into this war the United States has gotten, not just behind the scenes, but in the open, with your own media reporting and triumphant in regards to the number of Russians that you have been getting killed by your weapons and by your, for that matter, intelligence. This is, look, they are inching us to oblivion. And they are arguing that people need to pay for their values. And in paying for their values, meaning paying more for oil, food, except in the famines that are basically taking place around the world. And why? Because they had grandiose ideas of the world as a chessboard, as opposed to a world of countries that want to have some level of sovereignty and autonomy. That's the worst aspect of this. This didn't have to be this way. Should countries be secure? Yes, countries should be secure. Do I like the fact that this war is taking place? No, by no stretch of the imagination. I find it to be radically senseless and a catastrophe in regards to Western policy. We would not tolerate what we were doing if it was applied to us. Let's stop pretending as if we would. And fact of the matter is, when you look at it through those lens or through those terms, then yeah, this is a provocation that didn't need to take place. And now they're spooked. They've decided to position themselves against another nuclear power with the US and Russia combined with 90% of the nuclear weapons on the planet. And they decided to have a proxy war against that country on their border, in addition to an economic war on top of it. It's going swimmingly. It's going swimmingly well. It's going swimmingly well. Who's here? Let's see.